Hello and welcome to the Retired to a Life You Love podcast with your host, Michelle Gessner. I'm Wendy McConnell. Well, hello, Michelle. How are we today?
We're doing great. And it's today, the recording is on a Monday, so you may be listening to this on another day of the week, but we are doing great for a Monday.
All right. Sounds good. I know you were away for a little while. I would love to hear about that sometime in the future. But yeah, on a Monday, you're here, I'm here, and we have a guest as well.
Yes. And yes, I will tell you all about my trip to Portugal, which I had to take after interviewing Glenda on a previous episode. There are two of those. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, you should. I'll tell you all about it in another time, because that's a whole hour right there.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So today we do have a special guest and a special topic. The topic is, what if the Marriage Equality Act is overturned? And especially with regard to the same-sex community, which that is going to impact in some way or another. So today I have an attorney here to answer some specific questions. Her name is Lorie Burch out of Dallas. She is the owner of a Dallas law firm that primarily focuses on estate planning. And I just want to give a couple other little tidbits, and I'm going to turn it over to Lorie. So Lorie this year was voted as Dallas's best civil family law attorney by readers of the Dallas Voice for the 6th time. So that's pretty impressive. The firm's also been awarded 3 years in a row as one of the 500 fastest growing law firms in the country. And I'm going to put a plug in for her. She has her own podcast. So if you are so inclined, you might want to check out her podcast. And I love the title. I'm going to let her tell you what the title is, and I'm going to turn it over to Lorie to just kind of fill in the gaps of whatever she wants to tell our listeners about herself.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Yes, I actually came up with the title for the podcast before wanting a podcast. I heard someone who is a business coach of mine say it in passing during some sales training. And I did a lot of research to make sure it wasn't trademarked or copyrighted, and 'tis not. So now what we have after a year now is the podcast by Burch Law, known as One of Us Knows What They're Talking About, and the Other One Is You.
Gotta love
and
that.
It's a very cheeky approach to talking about serious topics, as well as bringing on guests from time to time that also have some specialized area of knowledge that a lot of people get wrong or think they know, but they in fact do not. So I'm happy to be here. I love podcasts.
Yeah, no, we are excited about that. And yeah, I love the title. And, you know, we see a little bit of that here too. I mean, you know, what do we call that? An armchair spectator, or what, I don't know what it's called. Armchair professional, armchair something.
Yeah.
I got it wrong. But yeah, we see that. And I just have to give you a little hats off. I like the title. It makes me want to listen to the podcast so I can hear more.
You should. It's very entertaining. It may not be anything else, but it's entertaining.
Oh, well, yeah. And there's +1 for that. So, Lorie, is there anything you want to fill in about who you are, what you do before we get started on our topic?
Yeah, I would say, you know, we actually this year are celebrating the 20th anniversary of my practice. Most of those 20 years have just been me, but I've been able to grow a very amazing team. And we help everybody, but we do have a special emphasis on the LGBTQ community. And because of that, I've had many opportunities to do a lot of advocacy and leadership. One of my running jokes is if it has an L, a G, a B, a T, then I've probably been on the board or have been chair of the board. And so this is an interesting topic. It's a scary topic for a lot of people in the community and really, everybody right now. But it's a real pleasure to be able to share this knowledge. I find when it comes to wills, trusts, powers of attorney and estate planning, that education is really the biggest key. So any opportunity I get to share that. I will say, you know, I am licensed in the state of Texas, so some things, if not most things, will be limited to how it applies Texas specifically. But there are a lot of similarities and commonalities among other states as well.
Well, we are excited to have you and excited to dive right in. So with that, I'm going to ask you our first question. we know that the LGBTQ community, I'm going to say same sex from here on out because I can't, that just is hard for me to say all of those letters. Anyway.
It's not a letter. You know, the Hawaiian alphabet only has 13 letters. And I think at some point this acronym might have all 13. But it's in an effort to be inclusive so that everybody feels like they have a place. But yes, I started on this journey when it was GLBT.
Oh so
my gosh. I'm not in the room where it happens, where the letters are rearranged or anything like that. But again, it's whatever you decide to term it, then I will make sure to draw whatever distinction I need to make.
Well, just so I don't twist it up with tongue-tied stuff, the community has special concerns that may or may not face heterosexual couples. Can you think of and can you talk about some of the pitfalls that this LGBTQ community should be warned about with regard to how they do their estate planning?
Definitely. And what's been interesting in spanning the 20 years of doing this is I did this planning for the community and for everyone because we don't discriminate, but this planning pre-marriage equality, pre-DOMA, and now post, and then now doing the planning in light of some specific challenges that might be coming our way. And I think from a legal standpoint, there's two distinctions that are important to make. So the first landmark decision that came down when it came to marriages for marriage equality, marriages for same-sex couples, is the Windsor case, which struck down DOMA, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. And this isn't significant because we don't know what, if anything, will happen. So that started where saying that the federal Defense of Marriage Act is gone. So the federal government is not going to discriminate against married couples that are same sex. It also made it to where states could still have their own DOMA laws. So that led to an era where, like in my state, Texas, where couples who were married, let's say they went to Iowa. I always use Iowa as an example because that was always one of the first marriage equality states that kind of blew my mind. You know, we saw it coming out of Vermont and Massachusetts and California and New York. But when Iowa got in on it, we're like, what is going on? This is happening, people. We are there. So let's say they got married in Iowa, but then moved to, or lived in Texas because you don't have to have residency to get married. A destination wedding in Iowa. I mean, huge cottage industry, I'm sure, for them there. Anyway, that the federal government would recognize rights for a Texas couple, but the state wouldn't. And, you know, we're one of those really fun community property states. So that just adds a lot of chaos. And taking political climate away for a second, you know, the Supreme Court historically has wanted to resolve these sorts of conflicts among states and laws. So I was very hopeful that we would get the marriage equality decision, the Obergefell decision, not because I thought that, you know, we've seen the light, but because, although when you look at the polling of people, the vast majority of people do agree for agree with marriage equality. However, having, you know, federal government or other entities catch up, but because it was such chaos. And I have a good friend who is a divorce attorney, a family law attorney. And so she lovingly called the marriage equality divorce equality, because people, while you don't have to have a residency requirement to get married in other states, you do to get divorced. And so that was a huge issue with couples that were breaking up, splitting up, and not able to legally get divorced. More we can dive into there. But I think it's important to understand that landscape, that once Obergefell came down, that then it was marriage equality across the land. So no matter where you got married, the state and the federal government, the state that you live in and the federal government is going to recognize that marriage. What happened with the Roe being overturned is some conversation around readdressing Obergefell and striking that down. In the wake of that happening, we had the Respect for Marriage Act, which essentially would potentially restore us back to the in-between phase of Windsor and Obergefell. All right. So we got that framework laid out. And so here's the thing that I would say that's important. is that for the last 20 years in that span of evolution, the biggest thing that I've tried to get across to people is that it's not necessarily the planning that's different. It's the consequences of not having it. So in pre or post marriage equality, or if marriage equality gets overturned, you're strangers in the eyes of the law, right? So the only way to make sure that you can make medical decisions for each other, inherit property that you've bought together, take care of kids that you've brought in this world together, is to have an estate plan, have wills, trusts, guardianship, powers of attorney. At the same time, one of the biggest re-educations that I had to do for this community in particular with marriage equality is that planning is still important, married or not. It's the same thing I have to, drive home for heterosexual couples, married couples, is that the statistics are everywhere, but to be really conservative, 70% of people have no plan at all. And they don't realize that their spouse does not have automatic rights to make medical decisions, to be able to inherit property. I mean, in Texas, with our community property laws, sometimes it's stepkids that end up inheriting assets without any sort of plan. And this is just a home or a bank account or what have you. So a lot of important pieces in place here to have a plan. So the special considerations, I do want to get into that, but I do think it's important right there to understand here's the landscape that we're dealing with, but really the advice is the same for anybody. Now, I want to talk about nuances when we get into other questions, but the biggest thing that the community can do to protect themselves, the biggest thing in a time of uncertainty and we don't know what's going to happen, is to take control with the thing you can control. And you can control having this plan in place and making sure that these pieces are in place to be able to have your relationship respected. Because the last thing that I want to say on this particular question, we'll see where it goes from there, is that one thing that heterosexual couples don't deal with that LGBTQ couples, same-sex couples could, is animus, people not wanting to honor their rights. And so having the paperwork to make sure that you can enforce your ability to visit someone in the hospital or to make a financial decision is all the more important. So it's on a level playing field, but there are some very special considerations that I know that we'll dig in more. But the biggest thing I would say is get a plan, and you're not exempt from needing to have a plan.
Okay. Well, with that, let's dig in a little bit more. So let's get into a few more nuances and specifics. And so I'm going to leave that as an open-ended question. We can just start really general, or if you want, I can start the conversation with, okay, let's say you have a same-sex couple who has a child together. And do they need to worry about parental rights? What should they do if something happens to the biological parent? Let's start there.
Yeah. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see the community make in particular is this. One of the beautiful things about marriage equality is now, let's say you have two women. I'm going to be gender specific here because it applies differently. But let's say you have two women who are married and one of them is pregnant and gives birth. Because of marriage equality, there is a marital presumption. So the other spouse gets added to the birth certificate. And that means a lot to be named on the birth certificate. But what they need to understand is that does not give any parental rights in Texas. It means nothing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now it can, yes. So what is alive and well, but for people who are in the following, and we need to talk a little bit more nuanced about this because I need to use my example too, because it'll blow your mind. I'm sure it will blow your mind to be blown, is that this is something that people should, this idea of what's called second parent adoption is alive and well in Texas, and people should not hesitate to go get this done as soon as possible to enforce the non-birth parent's right to the child. Now, as far as men using surrogates and adoption in other states, they have different laws. But I want to be very specific about this. So that would be the tool to do it. Now, I want to use something that happens a lot, and I'll use my own example of what's called reciprocal IVF. So I had my eggs frozen, and then they were not inseminated. What is it?
Fertilized.
Fertilize. Thank you. And then so that's IVF. So rather than them being transferred into me to carry my own biological children, my wife did, to be part of the process. And, hey, if I can outsource a pregnancy, why not?
I was just going to say that was a little selfish of you there, right?
It was her idea. So that's fine, But in Texas, what defines a mother so this is very gender specific. And I think a way to kind of argue this in a different judicial climate that we have now would be sex discrimination versus LGBTQ discrimination, but that's for another topic. But mother is defined as giving birth, adopting, or having some sort of adjudication by court. Now, these are so we have 2 daughters this way through reciprocal IVF. They are my biological genetic children. And if you met the 6-year-old, you would know this because I have managed to clone myself. I said that I wanted to have a daughter just like me. And my mom said, yeah, me too. And now I understand what she meant. Okay. They are mine. No doubt about it. However, the definition I just gave you, am I their legal mother? I'm not. So I actually went through the adoption process to adopt my own biological kids. Now,
insane.
this is different state to state, but for people who are in states like Texas, this is something to make sure that you are talking to an experienced and knowledgeable in LGBTQ legal rights to see how you might want to button up securing your legal rights to your own children.
Wow. Okay, so in some states that is not the case. Can you think of another state that would not be a problem?
California. They have ways it depends on whether you're going through IVF, adoption, in vitro fertilization, all of that, but their laws recognize things differently when you're giving birth. And I think there are some states that don't even allow for a second parent adoption, which is what this is typically called colloquially.
So what you're referring to as the fix here in the state of Texas is legally adopt the child so that you have parental rights.
It's one of them. Nothing will ever forego or take the place of also establishing an estate plan that has guardianship. One thing standard we do is to also make sure that there's a document where you've stated who can make emergency medical decisions for your kids if you're unable to make them, because guardianship's only if you pass away. So clearly a same-sex couple that has children, if they both have legal rights, they would want to do this if something happens to both of them. But in situations where only one has legal rights, this is definitely something they want to do to make sure that their spouse is able to at least have guardianship rights, make medical decisions when they're not considered a legal parent. One example would be I also have stepkids. So I can't legally adopt them, but there are reasons why if something happened to their 2 legal parents that I would need to be appointed. But the only way to do that is through paperwork, not just by default laws.
I'm wondering, so is that basically putting in like a medical power of attorney to make sure that you have, that you're notified of certain things and you have decision-making abilities?
Yeah. In Texas, this document's called the designation of agent to make healthcare decisions for children, something along those lines. I'm certain every state would have something like this. It is the legal alternative to what we hear lots of parents do. Oh, I just hand wrote a note that said, so-and-so can make medical decisions while we're on vacation without them and all of that. It's like, yeah, that's not really going to be legally enforceable, but this document is.
So on that note, and I don't want to get us off track, but I had someone walk into my office who told me they did not need an estate plan because they wrote it down on a piece of paper, and which is called a holographic will, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And that because that's allowed in the state of Texas, they're good, all is well. But yeah. That's not what you would recommend, right?
That it's not. Well, in an emergency, we would sooner recommend with our guidance to do a holographic will versus any of the stuff you see on the internet. I mean, it is terrible. And when I say terrible, it won't work. I mean, isn't that the point of doing it? And so these things fall flat. And when you talk about a community that's more at risk legally, the last thing you want to do is take shortcuts or try and do something in what you perceive to be the cheapest or quickest way, because it will always backfire. I guarantee. I have some of the best slides when I do presentations that show how this stuff has failed. And it blows people's minds, but it happens more often than not. So a lot of people think it's better than nothing. Quite often it is nothing, and occasionally it's worse than nothing. And I've got lots of great examples for that. Yeah, the holographic will is something where it's really preserved for an emergency, because there's a lot of hoops and things that you have to jump through, and time delays and money that to get that honored, and it still may not work. I mean, if you're estranged from your family and you try to do a holographic will, it won't work, because part of proving up a holographic will for a court to approve it and make it say it's valid is that all the family, the heirs, have to consent to it.
Oh,
so that wouldn't be
that's a snake pit right there.
Yeah, I mean, and in some cases this works, but yeah.
I can't imagine getting all of the family to agree on anything, much less something like that. So that,
in my experience, it doesn't turn out too well.
I'm sure. Well, I want to just touch back on the subject of the Marriage Equality Act, because I've had folks specifically ask, what happens if that's overturned? First of all, what's your opinion if that could be overturned? And then if it is, what would happen to same-sex couples?
Yeah. And the thing that's kind of scary is we just don't know. And I think, you don't have to watch more than 10 minutes of news these days to understand that these are unprecedented times, and not always in a good way. A lot of things arguably are happening legally and constitutionally that should not happen. So how do people in our position be able to say, well, this is what would happen here? We just don't know. So let's talk about a few things though that could happen. So we do have the Respect for Marriage Act, which essentially says the federal government's going to recognize your marriage and state to state has to recognize it. Is it conceivable that could be even overturned? I mean, it could. It could. But right now, more thoughts are to overturning Obergefell. So in states like Texas, that we have a ban in our Constitution against same-sex marriage. We have it. And it's never been repealed, even though it's unconstitutional per Obergefell. But if you think through the fact, if Obergefell gets overturned, that's the law on the books. Then what about marriages that have already happened?
I'm going to stop you right there. Did I hear you correctly that on the Texas state constitution, it is unlawful to have a same-sex marriage? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
I did not know that.
That's still part of our constitution. And
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not enforced. It's unconstitutional per Obergefell. You know, we still have federal supremacy here. But if Obergefell's overturned, that's still on the books.
And I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I really don't. But I want you to, for our listeners who don't know what Obergefell, I don't even know how to say it as well as you do. Could you please explain what that landmark case was about real quickly, just so we have some reference points?
Right. And that's why I was trying to dig into that at the beginning to kind of give us the landscape. So that was the decision after the Windsor case, after striking down the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, that led to the Supreme Court saying, no, marriage equality is the law of the land. You cannot, just like in the Loving versus Virginia, you cannot deny marriage rights to an interracial couple. You cannot deny marriage rights anywhere in the United States for same-sex couples.
And that was a case that originated in Canada, was it? Or the couple was living in Canada?
No, I believe it was Ohio. So the things that I love about being in estate planning is both of the marriage equality cases, first the Windsor and then Obergefell, are both estate planning cases, essentially. So I often make the argument that this is civil rights law that I am practicing, which was always my dream. So Windsor had to do with the estate tax exemption. So if you have there's an estate tax exemption. I can't remember what it was at the time that her wife passed away. But because the state or because the federal government did not recognize her marriage, she did not get the unlimited marital exemption. So she had to pay federal estate tax. So they challenged this case. And that's what said, no, DOMA is hereby overturned. The Defense of Marriage Act does not exist. And so it led from, for her from the estate tax issue and not having her marriage honored. Fast forward to the Obergefell case. His husband was dying, and I think they lived in Ohio, and they flew, and I think got married on the tarmac of gosh, I can't remember the state. It was like Maryland or a state that would recognize the marriage. So they had a marital license. But then back in Ohio, I'm pretty sure it was Ohio. Don't hold me to all of this. They would not put him on the death certificate as a spouse.
Okay, this was before the
so
marriage
that's
equality.
That's what led to marriage equality. But so those were the facts of those cases that led to this. So what was alluded to in the overturning Roe decision was overturning Obergefell. In the meantime, we have the Respect for Marriage Act, which is a federal law, but the Supreme Court can still strike down federal laws.
Okay.
So all of that's on the table. Everything's on the table. And then we have another thing where I would not be so surprised if the governor of Texas decided to then void marriages. So if you have something where marriage equality or the Respect for Marriage Act is overturned, or deemed unconstitutional, then marriages that still exist should exist, right? Like that's not going to undo those marriages. Well, what if a governor tried to void them? Could they do that? Who knows? Would they try? I could see it happening. So one of the things I don't know that I would necessarily, this isn't necessarily advice, but I want to throw it out as something that I know LGBTQ organizations have thrown out as potential is for married couples to get a marriage license in a protective state. Because if you went to a state like California, New York, Washington State and had a marriage license there, then it's argued that the governor of a state like Texas couldn't void a marriage from another state.
Right. Okay.
So again, what a mess.
It is a mess.
What a mess. And one of the nuances, because I do want to say in general, people just need to have a plan in place, but we cannot leave this topic without me addressing the next thing, because it is important that people go to not only to get a plan, not only to get it done the right way, meaning don't do DIY, holographic, these reduced legal services, even HR benefits. I'm sorry. Like, it's wonderful that companies think that that's helping, because I know that's their intent, because they're not estate planning attorneys, but all of that is junk. It's not saving money. It's not saving time. But the third thing is finding a qualified law firm. And in fact, on our website, we have a checklist of what to look for, both for LGBTQ couples and just the general public. But it's important because one of the things that we did before marriage equality, but where we had states that would recognize it, we would have something that would say, I'm married to so-and-so. I understand that Texas doesn't recognize this, but if they do, I want this person treated with all full rights as my spouse, blah, blah, blah. Well, now what we've started doing since, frankly, the election but certainly once Roe was overturned, is changing that language to say, I'm married to so-and-so. If our marriage is ever deemed void or overturned, I still want this person to be treated as my spouse for all purposes of this estate plan, this will, this trust, or whatnot. And so we're now starting to use specialized language in both financial powers of attorney, wills, and trusts, to make sure that if something does happen, that we've accounted for that scenario. Because I can, if I identify anybody, a stepdaughter, if I say, this is my stepdaughter, but I want her treated as my descendant for this will, then that counts.
Absolutely.
So that's why it's important to have some very specialized language or to consider that. And not all firms are going to know to do that.
Well, before I jump to the question that I definitely want you to address, which is what should people look for in the credentials of an attorney who, as an estate planning attorney, who can specifically help the LGBTQ community? That's a question I want to ask you. But before I do, do you feel that some of these packages, and it's probably a difficult, I already know what you're going to say, but I want to ask you anyway. So some of these prepackaged type services like LegalZoom, I'm going to pick on them. Now, LegalZoom is not for this type of couple that has special issues and things that really need to be buttoned up, like you explained. But are you saying that it just isn't worth for anyone, even someone with a very simple situation?
During COVID, I reached out to my hairdresser and I said, what would be a good box dye so I can color my gray hair until I can get in to see you? And she said, I can't recommend any of them because they're all crap.
Okay. All right.
So what I would say is I never, ever, as an attorney, when I was in class at the George Washington University of Law School in our nation's capital, I never thought that I would have to learn as much as I do now about online wills, AI, all of that. And yet I am an unwilling subject matter expert because I have probably reviewed, and this is not hyperbole, thousands of them. There are so many pitfalls. The number one pitfall hurts my little lawyer heart a little bit because I'd love to tell you, well, they're not customized. They don't have special language. They don't fit this scenario. And that's all true. But the biggest issue is at least 70% of the time or more, they don't even get signed correctly. And there is no close in estate planning and probate, in Texas at least. Either it's signed with all the formalities required by law, or it does not exist. Mm-hmm. And it is baffling to my entire firm why it's so hard to get these things signed correctly. But most of the time they don't. And when do you find out that it's not valid and won't work?
When it's too late.
It's when it's too late. And in Texas, pretty much every type of process that you have to go through when someone passes away requires a lawyer. So you're going to have to hire a lawyer no matter what. Why don't you do it when it's getting a plan in place? Because the number one thing in the 21 years that I've heard, and we probably at last estimate have 5,000 to 7,000 clients that we've seen, if not more. All walks of life, ages, kids, no kids, married, what have you. Modest assets, no assets, whatever. The number one thing every one of them have said is that we want things to be as simple and as straightforward as possible, and we don't want to leave a mess.
Sure.
And if that is your mission in doing this, then do it right. Get it done the right way, because you will leave a mess somehow. That holographic will, that handwritten will, maybe it helps a little bit, maybe, but it's still going to leave a mess. Mm-hmm. And I have yet to find a scenario where that typically works. So just resist the temptation. If people think it saves time and money, it hardly ever does. So I don't care who you are, but the consequences can be even more grave, pun intended, but the consequences can be even more grave for higher risk families. LGBTQ families, in Texas, blended families, estranged families, homeowners, business owners. I would put all of those under categories of high risk families or individuals when it comes to needing to do this in a highly specialized, customized way. It's not something that's supposed to be for the super wealthy. It is not. That is a huge misperception we battle against. This is for average, everyday people that don't want to leave a mess and protect their family.
I love it. Thank you for saying that. I think people tend to put estate planning at the bottom of the list anyway, because I'm thinking, I'm no psychologist, but it's probably because people don't want to think about that someday they're going to die. So I
Yeah.
find myself in my work having to twist arms and nag to get estate planning done. But to your point, when you're ready to get it done right. Because by the time it is found out, you're right, you're gone. It's too late. And then what's going to happen? So can you answer my question about credentials? I know we're running a little short on time, but I do not want to end this episode without you telling our listeners what should they look for instead of LegalZoom. What should they look for in an accredited, credentialed attorney, especially for the LGBTQ community?
Certainly. So LGBTQ specific is, I would find one that has experience with dealing with that, these relationships in this community. It's not enough, although it's a good start, if they belong to, like in Texas, we have, the Dallas area, we have the North Texas LGBT Chamber of Commerce. We have a great resource. Lambda Legal, HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, they all have a lot of lawyer referral services. So those are good starts. But just because they paid their dues to an association or a chamber does not mean that they have that experience. But that is at least a starting point. Now, let's backtrack. That's the only LGBTQ specific thing I would say. As far as everything else, I have a long list. It can be on, again, you can go to our website, but let me go through at least 3 or 4 key things. One, I would find one where estate planning, wills, trusts is the primary focus of their practice, at least 50%. For us, it's like 75%. But if you dabble in a lot of different areas of the law, then you are not going to have as much knowledge and experience in this, because the way we draft something today or the way we advise on something today is very different than 5 years ago, than 10 years ago, than 15 years ago. So it needs to be the majority of their practice. Somewhat related to that, the second criteria is I'd recommend that they also practice probate. So probate is the legal process when someone passes away, whether it's through a court, whether it's transferring title of a home, a bank account, a car, what have you. Because if they don't see how the documents they're drafting are interpreted and enforced, then they have no business drafting them. They are hypothetical law students that's just filling something out for fun.
That's a good point.
I firmly believe that. Then there's 2 other criteria that I could go on and on, but I want to hit 2 more. One is, or the third one I should say, is ask if they're going to assist you or look holistically at how bank accounts are set up, how beneficiaries on life insurance, retirement, investments are set up, because all of those things can function and flow outside a will, a trust, or an estate plan. So and that's that's also, Michelle, one of the downsides to this DIY stuff. Nobody's telling you how you should fill out your life insurance beneficiary based on the will you just completed. And so everything can just implode on itself. So that's a really big thing, and not all firms do it. And making sure that they'll guide you and even assist you, fill out forms, talk to bankers. We'll do whatever we need to make sure everything coordinates with your overall vision. And the last category I would put will seem like the silliest, but it's what I was mentioning with the DIY stuff. Ask them and ensure that they will help you with the signing process to make sure that everything is signed, witnessed, and notarized correctly, that they will help you or oversee it for you. That's pretty common with an estate planning firm, but you never know.
Sure.
Like some of these things I've seen where they'll, it's a firm, they send you a form to fill out, they generate it, and they send you signing instructions. I see that happen a lot, even with these HR companies that provide legal benefits. So that's very critical. So those would be the ones that are really, really big. I could hit on other ones, but those are ones. What I want you to notice, Michelle, is did I mention finding the cheapest one as a criteria?
No. And
I did not.
No, and I'm sure that's on purpose, because you get what you pay for. And something like this is just too critical to cut corners, especially because by the time it's found out, it's too late. I do want to tag along on that comment that you made about implementation, because I'm a nag on that. And I talk about that all the time. The attorney is, probably not your office, but there are so many times where I see clients come in, they have completed the estate planning process with an attorney. They've received the documents. The attorney may have even gone so far along to list what they're supposed to do to execute these documents. And I'm not talking about just signing, but also implementation, changing beneficiaries and so on, titling things differently. And the client just never does. They don't get around to it.
Yeah.
So then it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's an unfunded trust. It's beneficiaries that conflict with the actual will. And so what do you have? You have a mess. So it's very common. It's very common. I try to, my firm helps with that, but I totally agree with you on the implementation. We started offering a few years ago a yearly subscription plan called the CYA plan, Cover Your Assets plan. And that's for people who want more extended ongoing services, because we provide all of that, all the deed work, we help with it. We send out reminders, but for those, and for some people that's enough, but we won't get ourselves into an estate plan that includes a trust where they need to fund it unless we've at least really hammered home how important it is to connect assets to your trust. And so I think that's very critical. I do, just in case it doesn't come up in the little time that we have left, whether it's an LGBTQ couple or not, but particularly in light of political times, I would suggest this. The idea of pursuing a revocable living trust plan versus a will plan, because a will, and this is very surprising to some people in Texas, still has to go through probate court. It still has to be approved by a judge. It's still, the executor still has to be appointed by a judge. It is a public record. So for those who want more privacy and not have the government knowing what's going on, or even family members that you don't want involved, a revocable living trust is becoming a lot more popular of an alternative. It's not for, I tell people, this doesn't mean you need to have a top hat and a monocle. It's not for something that's for super wealthy people. It's for exactly the same people a will is for. But if you want to bypass the delays and expense and have more privacy and protection than a will is going to provide you, then a revocable living trust plan is something that people should at least consider. It's not a one size fits all, but it's a lot more on the table than I have seen in, 5 to 8 years ago. I'm a big advocate of revocable living trusts, and I try to, in a non-legal way, try to explain the virtues of a revocable living trust. So I agree with you. I love it. This is so important, and it's a topic that's very important to us to convey to our clients. I hope that our listeners listened carefully. Lorie, how can people reach out to you if they have questions or they want to engage you in services?
Yeah, first of all, just if they're looking for more information, we have a very great website that has a lot of blogs, videos, information. We have a lot of downloads. We have one specifically for the LGBT community, but also Texans in general. Our website is the best resource for anything when it comes to estate planning and probate in Texas. It is Burch, BURCH -law.com, or you can go to cyalaw.com. It'll all get you there.
I love it. And you are not licensed in other states, but if for our listeners who are living in another state, should they contact you? Maybe you can refer them to somebody else, or what should they do?
Well, technically I'm licensed in Maryland, but it's on inactive status. So don't contact me from Maryland. But yes, to your point, Michelle, absolutely. We have a really great national network of attorneys. And if we don't, we often can make recommendations to you. So let's say it were an LGBTQ couple, there are a lot of chambers of commerce and organizations that we would say, hey, we don't know somebody in that state or city, but here's a place you could go for resources. So definitely would want people to feel free to reach out to us to see if we can make those connections for them, or at least tell them how to best search for it.
Well, thank you so much, Lorie.
Literally anytime.
Well, Michelle, if anybody has some questions they want to ask you, how did they go ahead and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we also have a website. It's probably the easiest way for you to reach out. And remember, GessnerWealthStrategies.com. Our contact information is right there, and happy to help however I can. Even if I can't help, like Lorie, I have a network and I can send you to someone who can.
All right. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with your friends. Until next time, I'm Wendy McConnell.
Thank you for listening to Retire to a Life You Love with Michelle Gessner from Gessner Wealth Strategies. We hope you were inspired to take steps to your financial freedom as you learned new techniques and strategies for managing your finances. To learn more about how you can improve your financial landscape, visit our website at www.gessnerwealthstrategies.com. That's GESSNER wealthstrategies.com. Or give Michelle and her team a call at 713-589-6448. And don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes are available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Michelle Gessner or Gessner Wealth Strategies. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.